Most men want to fix their marriages. And the statistics show us that 70 to 80% of divorces are filed by women, which means there's a lot of men going through an unwanted divorce. When they find out about it, that she's that unhappy, that she's leaving, they want to fix it. They want to make things right. They want to go to counseling. But usually at that point, by the time she's filed or has left the house or said that she's leaving, usually she's already grieved the marriage. She's already processed a lot of it and has her feet totally out of the door. So for most men, it feels like they never got a chance to fight for their marriage. They never got an opportunity to fix it. It feels like it's the first time they're hearing about it, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And then on top of that, now they have to deal with injustices in the legal system. There's often a lot of injustice in terms of how finances are split up, custody time. And remember, none of this is what he wanted, right? So now suddenly you're losing a huge chunk of your income, maybe half, maybe more than half. You're losing assets. You only get to see your kids a few days a week, maybe even less. And maybe it really affects your future, right? Maybe you're going to retire in a few years and now you can't. There are so many layers of injustice wrapped up in divorce. And this is where a lot of men get really, really stuck, and they have a hard time moving past that injustice. And it's not just moving past the consequences of the injustice, right? Because there are consequences, right? There's financial consequences, there's parenting consequences, there's consequences for your career and how long you're going to have to work. Right? But it's not just the consequences of the injustice that beat men down. It's the existence of the injustice itself that is just so hard to take. It's so hard to accept and live with and be here in a world where this happens and is okay and is allowed to pass without consequences. So inside of Better Beyond Divorce, in my courses and in my community, this is an issue that comes up a lot. It's no surprise a lot of men have trouble dealing with this injustice. And in this video, I'm going to share with you a conversation that I recently had with a client that really opened my eyes to ways that we can build more resilience as you're going through injustice. So this isn't going to make it go away. This isn't tricking your brain into believing it's not unjust or that everything's okay. There is injustice happening, and we do have to deal with it, and we have to deal with the consequences. But we can do it in a way that gives you strength, resilience, confidence, and the energy to show up, to build a bright future for yourself, for your kids, instead of being beaten down or broken by the injustice that you're suffering. Before we get into this conversation, I really want to acknowledge how hard this is. Injustice it's not just damaging, it's terrifying. And this is why it's hard for so many people, so many men especially in divorce, to move past it, because the human brain doesn't like this kind of imbalance. It wants things to be even. It wants things to be square, to be fair, to be right. And it isn't, right? The scales are unbalanced and no one's doing anything about it. Right? So here we are, everything's out of balance. No one's righting it. No one's fighting for it. No one's adjusting it. And that's really scary. Because if I have to accept that, then I have to live in a world where this injustice exists and is okay, and I could be hurt by it any time, right? And so the nervous system reacts to that. It's a really scary place to be. The nervous system responds, you go into fight or flight, but then you realize there's not much you can do. So you go into a freeze state, you start to experience depression, overwhelm, despair, helplessness, hopelessness, right? And your world starts to get smaller. Because that fear makes everything seem unsafe, makes everyone seem unsafe, and it can trickle out into other parts of your life. Not only do you find yourself not trusting women, not trusting relationships, not trusting marriage, but you might find yourself not trusting your coworkers, not trusting the company that you work for, not trusting your boss. Or you might find yourself feeling like you're really alone and everyone's kind of out to get you. And that's a part of this state that your nervous system is in response to the injustice of the divorce. So this is hard, it's scary, and it can be really, really overwhelming. And it's my hope that in this video, I can give you some tools and some perspectives that will help you build emotional resilience so that you can navigate this really effectively without projecting that injustice into other places where it might not actually exist, and to actually deal with the injustice where it does exist very effectively so that you can pick up and move forward with your life and not get stuck here. So I was talking about this with a client. For the sake of this video, we'll call him Ben. And I asked him the question. I said, well, Ben, what is injustice exactly? What does that mean to you? And he talked about it a little bit, and we basically drilled it down to this sense. Injustice is this sense that I don't deserve this. Right? Something is happening that's not right. I didn't deserve for this to happen, and I didn't deserve to be treated this way when it did happen. And so I was like, okay, I get that. Right? You don't deserve it. You're a good guy. But who would? Right? When you say, I don't deserve this, it's unjust, it implies that somebody else might deserve it. So what kind of person would deserve the sort of treatment you're getting here during this divorce? And I really love working with Ben because he's very thoughtful. And he really took his time and he thought about this. And he said, the first thing that comes up for me is that like a bad person deserves this, right? Like somebody who's a liar, somebody who's abusive, who beats his wife, who steals, who gambles, a murderer, somebody who struggles with addiction, a cheater, or somebody who's done bad things, a bad person deserves it. And I didn't say anything because Ben was definitely still thinking. And he took the next step and he said, well, but those people, do they really deserve it? I mean, what made them the way they are, right? What made them do those things? What kind of person would do those things, would cheat, would lie, would steal, would be abusive? And now I know a lot of people, and maybe some people watching this are going to be like, well, yeah, bad people do bad things, right? Some people are just assholes and that's the way the world is. And you have to look out for them and try not to get involved with them. But Ben and I had already done a lot of work, and he had spent a lot of time trying to understand himself. The mistakes that he had made, the times in his life where he drank too much, where he was cruel, said mean things, was insensitive. What was it that made him behave in ways that hurt other people? Right? What had made him make those mistakes? And so he had some insight into this. And so he kept thinking out loud, and he said, what kind of person cheats? What kind of person struggles with addiction? What kind of person steals, lies, is abusive? And he said, I think the only people who could do things like that are people who are in pain, people who are really, really struggling. And Ben said, I guess it would have to be someone who hasn't been able to see themselves in a good way for a really long time. Right? Somebody who feels broken inside, somebody who feels shame. And, up until now, guys, I've been paraphrasing what Ben said, but I remember this next bit exactly word for word. He said, a person who would do those things is someone who is injured in a fundamental state of building their identity. Someone who experienced trauma, rejection, abandonment, some sort of wounding early in their life when they were developing their sense of who they were. And because of that wounding, because of that injury, they learned that they were broken, that there was something wrong inside of them. And that's when Ben was able to admit to me, he said, I feel like that sometimes. It's like there's this little voice in the back of my head that's like, there's something wrong with you. Right? You're bad, you're broken. Maybe you do deserve this. That is why the injustice of divorce is so devastating. It isn't just the way your ex-wife sees you or treats you, although that itself is devastating. It isn't just the verdict of the court, the way the judges or the lawyers treat you. It's not, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. What makes the injustice of a divorce so devastating is when there's that little voice inside of you that's confirming it. That some part of you, some little piece of your mind whispers, you are broken, I knew it. And this is why injustice during a divorce, it doesn't just threaten your bank account or your retirement or your time with your kids. It can threaten your very identity, your sense of self, your confidence, your sense of who you are in the world. That is what is so devastating, and that is what is so hard to come back from. Because if I lose myself in this injustice, if I start to doubt and I don't know who I am, and I start to internalize that sense of being broken, I can't deal with the actual external impacts of the injustice. I can't deal with the legal stuff. I can't deal with my ex-wife. I can't deal with my kids because I am overwhelmed by that pain that's coming from the inside, that's been brought up by that injustice. And so Ben recognized this in himself. He was able to see that in a lot of small ways, he was losing his identity. He was feeling like he was pushed into a corner, treated like a bad, broken person. And a part of him was starting to believe that that was true, that that was who he was. And what he told me was, he said, once you realize you're broken, everything after that becomes about managing that fact, about trying to hide it, trying to pretend you're not, trying to deal with it, trying to cope with it, because it feels like there's nothing you can do to change it. And this is so, so important. I hope you'll hear this. This isn't just about the divorce. A lot of people think it is. They think everything they're feeling, the pain, the intensity, the desperation, the anger, the frustration, they think it's all about the divorce and the injustice in the divorce, but it is not. I have worked with hundreds of men. I have seen many more go through my Better Beyond Divorce courses and talk to them in my online community. Every single one of them is dealing with things that are older than the divorce. The divorce and the injustices that are happening within it, they are awakening old injuries, old wounds. So for Ben, this wasn't the first time he'd felt broken, right? He had felt that way for a really long time. He had just gotten really good at managing it, right? He had been able to bury it, forget about it, but it was still there in his subconscious. So many people have this sense of inner brokenness. In fact, I would say most people have it. Most of us have it. I have it. It's something I've worked on a lot in myself. And honestly, it's something I will probably have to keep working with my entire life. And it's because of what happens to us as children. It does not need to be severe trauma, although for far too many people it is. It can be a lot simpler than that. Imagine any elementary school or living room in America and picture an angry child in it. What happens when there is an angry child in that room? Well, usually the angry child gets sent to timeout. And they stay in timeout until they can calm down, and then they are accepted back into the classroom, back into the family, back into the relationships when they have their anger under control, right? And we think that we're teaching children, I'm not even sure what, we're punishing them for an emotion. We're punishing them by removing relationships. But what do children learn? Right? That child is having an emotion, a normal, healthy, human emotion. It's something they didn't choose. It came up inside of them, and they're being punished for it, and punished in the most painful way for a child. Right? Physical pain is not the most painful way to punish a child. The most painful way to punish a child is to take away their relationships, because a child cannot survive without its relationships. And a child without its parents, without adults to care for it, is going to die. So if you remove a child from the relationships, from the caregivers, that is a life and death situation now for that child. It's the worst thing that can happen to them. We do this to children when they get emotional, when they show any emotion. They're angry, they're upset. We take away the relationship. We put them in timeout. We say, you can't be with us until you can be calm. And so the child learns that this thing that came up inside of them that just seems to be a part of them that they didn't choose and they don't understand because no one's ever talked to them about their emotions, this thing in them is bad. It's unacceptable. And if they allow anyone to see that it is there, they're not going to be accepted into the group. They're not going to be loved. They're not going to be taken care of. And so the child learns to reject this part of themselves, to hate this part. They learn that there's something wrong with them, something broken in them that they have to be very, very careful now to manage throughout the rest of their lives. I watched this happen to a child a few weeks ago. It was heartbreaking. I live in Mexico. In Oaxaca, and I was with my mom in a coastal town called Huatulco on the beach. And it was at this little bay. It was very, very quiet. The ocean was very calm. And there was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, sitting under an umbrella. And she was just howling, crying and screaming. And her whole family was just in the water, maybe like knee, waist deep in the water. It was her mom, her little brother, and her dad. And they weren't far away. They were maybe 10 yards down the beach in the water. And this little girl was so upset, and she kept just screaming, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." And it just ripped your heart out. Her mother was standing there in the water with her little brother, and she kept saying, "You need to calm down. I'm not coming until you calm down. You need to relax." And so this little girl would sit there, and you could see her. She was like hiccuping and coughing, and she's like trying so hard not to cry. And then she like couldn't take it, and it would just burst out, and she'd start screaming again. And a couple of times she would like run down the beach to her mother, and her mom would yell at her and tell her she had to go back and sit by herself until she could be calm. And this went on for probably 10 minutes with this poor little girl just in agony until she finally choked it down far enough and was calm long enough that her family let her come and join them in the water. What did that little girl just learn? And she just learned some brutal lessons. One, she learned that when she's in pain, no one's coming to help her. But worse than that, she learned that her pain is unacceptable to other people. And she learned that if she shows her pain, she's going to be rejected. She's not allowed to be a part of the family. The love is taken away from her. The care is taken away from her if she shows her pain. Right? That woman just taught her daughter to stifle her emotions and hide them from her family in order to be safe and loved. That woman, she's not like an evil person, right? She's trying to be a good mom. She's probably even learned that technique in some parenting book or been taught it by some parenting coach who said your child needs to learn how to self-soothe. The child's not learning how to self-soothe. The child is learning how to stifle a part of themselves, how to reject themselves, and they are learning that there is something wrong with them, and they better not let anyone see that pain or those emotions when they come up. So do you see how easy it is for a child, a normal, healthy human child, to learn, to internalize this lesson that there's something wrong with me? It happens very, very easily. And then it's there in the background with us our whole lives. We're wondering, am I good enough? Am I worthy of my mother's love? Am I meeting my father's expectations? Is this person going to like me? Is my partner going to like me? Am I really good enough for my spouse? Am I worthy of their love? What if I'm not? What if they reject me? I better be careful. I better not show too much. And then you get divorced, and there's a lot of injustice and aggression towards you, and you're being treated like a bad, broken person. And it confirms to that little part of you that learned that lesson as a child that you are in fact bad and broken, that that is true. And so all of that old hurt and self-judgment comes up. And that is what breaks us down because there's nowhere safe to go. If that judgment's inside of me, if I'm believing I'm bad and broken and I'm judging myself in that way, it's not safe to be alone. There's no peace for me in my brain. Like there's nowhere, I have nowhere to run to, right? The people that were helping me keep those voices at bay, now they're rejecting me. My wife is rejecting me, maybe my family, and I don't have any internal safety either. And this is where divorce gets really dangerous. This is where people commit suicide because it's not safe or sustainable to be alone with themselves. So moving past, coping with, dealing with the injustice of a divorce, moving on with your life despite that injustice. It's not about getting your ex-wife to believe you're a good man. It's not about getting the courts to see you in a better light. It is about learning to see yourself as a good person, as a good man. That is what gives you solid ground to stand on. That's what gives you a safe place inside of yourself to be, no matter what is happening outside of you. And from that stability, that safety, now you'll find the strength, the energy, the resilience, and the clarity of thinking to be able to cope with the consequences of the divorce, to be able to cope with the financial consequences, the custody consequences, and all of the rest of it. Does that sound daunting? It's really not as hard to heal these wounds, to start to see yourself as a good person as you might think. All you have to do is go back and see those childhood experiences from the outside. You have to see it the way that I saw it as a third-person stranger looking at that little girl on the beach. So what did I see? I didn't see a broken child. I saw a broken system and a broken family. But I saw a healthy child, a normal child who was learning to experience the full range of human emotions. Right? She was having a very, very normal, natural human experience. That little girl was not broken. There was nothing wrong with her. What's broken is a society that thinks that it's okay or even beneficial to punish a child for feeling what people feel, for feeling a normal emotion. What's broken is a society that thinks we should threaten those children with the loss of the relationships they need to survive in order to frighten them into stifling their emotions instead of teaching them how to effectively process, cope, and move through strong emotional experiences. But that little girl wasn't broken. And if you start to look back and find the moments in your life where you learned that painful lesson, you're going to see that you weren't broken either. You too were just a normal human child feeling normal human emotions in a society that doesn't have much room for humanity. What that little girl needed, what you needed when you were little, was somebody to sit down and say, wow, I can see that you're so upset. That must feel really scary. This must be really hard. But you know what? I'm here. And even if you're angry, even if you're sad, I'm not going anywhere. Right? I'm here and I love you even when you feel this way. That little girl's parents, they didn't know how to be present with her emotions, probably because they never learned how to be present with theirs. And so with all of the best intentions in the world, they were just passing on trauma. The trauma that they received, they passed it on to her, and now she's going to have to grapple with that later in her life. But fortunately, our brains are big and beautiful and resilient, and we can grapple with these things later in our lives. You can grapple with them now. You can start to go back and have compassion for yourself as a child. And as you do that, you will start to like yourself more. You will start to trust yourself more. You will start to respect yourself more. And the ground under your feet will get a little firmer. That voice in your mind will get a little quieter, and you will be more resilient, even in the face of the injustices happening within this divorce. If you don't have that resilience, that internal safety, that internal confidence and self-respect, and you have to deal with the challenges and the consequences of injustices in our legal system or in the divorce process itself, that's when people don't make it. It's everything that's happening out there, even though it's bad, and I know it can be really bad for some of you. Sometimes the circumstances of divorce are very, very hard to cope with and accept. I know that. But you can. And you can live a rich and full and happy, healthy life, even under these circumstances, even though they're shitty and unfair. But you can't do it if there's that little inner voice of doubt poking you as well, telling you you're bad and broken. So you've got to get that solid ground. You've got to create that internal safety. And then I promise you, everything else that is happening will become more manageable. I'm not saying it's going to go away or get easy, but it will become more manageable, less desperate, less overwhelming. If you would like more step-by-step support in this process of rebuilding that identity and doing that work, please watch my free masterclass. It's called How to Take Back Control of Your Life After Divorce, and it'll walk you through a really powerful emotional regulation strategy that will help you get the things your ex-wife has said out of your head, deal with the overwhelming pain and emotions, and start to build that confidence so you can face each day calmly and confidently and deal with the things that you need to deal with each day. All right, you'll find the masterclass in the video description. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.